Good evening, everyone. I'm Jessica McQuaid. I'm the specialist lead for weight management, Your Health, Your Way, which is one of the ABL contracts in Nottinghamshire. So I'm an AFN accredited nutritionist, and I have around 10 years experience working in weight management with children and adults. This webinar is kind of a culmination of things that I've learned in formal nutrition training. So I've got a degree in food and nutrition and also a master's in public health nutrition. And then lots of things I've learned whilst working with clients in a weight management setting. So that's both children and adults. So intuitive eating does make a lot of sense. So the principles make a lot of sense. And we will recap on the principles that Milena went over last webinar, last month. And it does appear simple, but practically applying it when you are following a weight management program can be quite difficult. So that's why I've put this webinar together from a nutritionist perspective, somebody who is client facing on the weight management pathway, on the weight management curriculum, to support clients to actually put this into practice whilst following the weight management curriculum. So some elements of weight management and intuitive eating might feel quite contradictory, because obviously the key elements of intuitive eating are about rejecting dieting mentality, challenging the food police, that kind of thing. And whilst you're trying to manage your weight, you might have more focus on what you're eating. But hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll have some practical tools that will help you incorporate elements of intuitive eating into your weight management progress. So I'm going to ask Stevie to kind of move through the slides because she's in control of that. So could I have the next slide, please, Stevie? Okay, so what is the end of the session, sorry. So what is intuitive eating? We're going to go through a quick recap of the key principles which Milena discussed in the last webinar. We're going to look at the cycle of dieting and how that can kind of be counterproductive when we're trying to lose weight. We're going to look at self-compassion, our inner food critic. We're going to look at thinking styles and how dieting might impact those thinking styles. We're going to look at mindful eating and how that can support weight management. We're going to look at feeling hunger and fullness. And then finally, movement and gentle nutrition. So quite key elements in the weight management program that we provide. And also I'll give you kind of some key advice and a toolkit to take away from this session today. Next slide, please, Stevie. So just quickly to recap the 10 principles of intuitive eating, which Milena discussed last time. So number 1 is to reject dieting mentality. So this is about trying to put diet culture to the back of your mind. It won't happen overnight, especially if you've been a chronic dieter for many years. These kind of beliefs and the way we think about food are quite ingrained. So it's going to be a slow process. I don't want people to go away from this webinar and last month's webinar thinking that it's going to happen straight away, because it won't. It will take practice. By diet culture, what I mean is things like counting calories, cutting out food groups, being very kind of strict with yourself, having good and bad foods, etc. The second principle is honouring your hunger. So what I mean by that is keeping your body biologically fed with adequate amounts of food. So hunger can lead to preoccupation with food. It can make us think about food. I'm sure we've all tried a low carb diet, for example, and the first thing we start to think about is everything that's high in carbohydrate: bread, pasta, rice, absolutely everything that is the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. But eating the foods in the correct quantities that we require will help with that. So it'll help us to stop being preoccupied with food and the food groups that we see as not allowed or bad. Hunger is designed to feel unpleasant, and that's to make us want to get rid of that feeling. So if it was a pleasant feeling, then we wouldn't eat. It's our body's way of telling us that we need to eat to make us not feel that feeling anymore. And that's our body's way of protecting us with starvation. So hunger is a really, really important thing, and getting used to listening to your body again is really important as well. And I will go into that in a little bit more detail later on in the webinar. So number 3 is making peace with food. So foods aren't good or bad. And labeling food is counterproductive and can lead to kind of forbidden fruit syndrome. I don't know whether any of you have heard that term before, but basically the same kind of concept as I discussed a second ago with the carbohydrate. As soon as something is forbidden, as soon as we feel like we're not allowed something, we start to want it even more. We start to crave it even more. Number 4, challenge the food police. So ask yourself if these statements are fact. So when you hear kind of that voice in your head telling you that foods are good, bad, that you should or shouldn't eat that, ask yourself, are these statements fact or is this just a belief? And where does that belief come from? And ask yourself, does negative self-talk make your relationship with food better or worse? Discover satisfaction. Again, when people have followed lots and lots of diets, sometimes they forget about the foods that they do enjoy. They get so entangled with different myths around food that they actually forget what it feels like to have an enjoyable, satisfying nutritional intake. And allow yourselves to eat those foods that you enjoy to make your body feel good. Number 6 is observe in your fullness. Number 6, feel your fullness. So working on listening to your body's signals, like I was saying, with satisfaction and full hunger, it's about trying to observe, not judge, but observe what's going on in your body. So work on listening to your body's signals. Number 7, so to cope with your emotions with kindness. So food doesn't always fix problems and it can actually make you feel worse. So finding the root cause of the emotion and working on other coping mechanisms is much more productive. Number 8, respect your body. So accept your body shape and your genetic blueprint. I think Milena used a really good example in the last webinar, that someone with a shoe size 7 wouldn't try and fit into a shoe size 5. And it's the same with our body size and shape. So respecting that and not trying not to focus too much on changing who we are and what we are. Number 9, movement. So feeling the difference. How does movement make us feel? Acknowledge how our body feels, how our mind feels after movement, rather than using it as a tool just for weight loss or to burn calories, for example. And then finally, number 10, gentle nutrition. So honouring your health. Like Milena said last time, you don't have to eat perfectly to be perfectly healthy. It's just about, a balance and finding what works for us. Everyone's normal is different. Normal eating looks different to absolutely everybody. But what I mean when I say normal eating is not having rules. So not having strict rules around food. I can eat this and I can't eat that. Not excluding things unless there's a reason. So for example, an ethical reason, a religious reason, or an allergy. Not feeling stressed or anxious about food choices, not feeling guilty about certain foods, having flexibility. So if, you end up going out for a meal that you weren't anticipating, being able to make a choice that feels good to you without feeling anxious about that. Enjoying food, so feeling satisfied by the food that you eat. And like I say, getting rid of all of those negative emotions around meal times and around food choices. Listening to hunger and fullness signals and eating the foods that make you feel good. So like I said, normal is absolutely different to everybody, and don't try not to compare yourself to others. So what is normal for one person might not be a normal portion size or normal quantity of food for you. It's about listening to your own body around food. Okay, next slide, please, Stevie. Okay, so the cycle of dieting, some of you may have seen this before, but if not, I'm just going to kind of run through it. And this slide really is just to show you how repeat dieting, you've probably heard the term yo-yo dieting, can send us kind of spiraling back round in this cycle. And with each of these cycles comes lots and lots of negative emotion around food. So if I start at the top, so we've got desire to change body or lose weight. So that is generally the reason that somebody starts a diet. It could be for health reasons, but when I talk about losing weight, that encapsulates that as well. So losing weight for a health reason or a medical reason. So the desire then leads to us kind of choosing what pathway we want to take. So usually food restriction in some way, shape or form. So for example, low calorie, cutting out food groups, clean eating, etc. That food restriction inevitably leads to feelings of deprivation. So we start to miss the foods that we enjoy. You know, I'm going to keep referring back to that low carb example, but you know, we cut out carbohydrates, but we really enjoy toast for breakfast in the morning. We're going to start feeling deprived before long. And that can then lead to excessive consumption of those forbidden foods. So if you tell yourself that you're not allowed something, when we then decide to start eating that food, it can lead to overconsumption because we've missed that food, and it can become quite compulsive, or it can even lead to binge eating. And often followed by those episodes of overconsumption, it can lead to feelings of guilt and shame, and even potential weight gain if we have kind of binge eaten or eaten excessively for a long enough period of time. And then that can send us back around in that cycle. So the desire to change your body or lose weight for a medical reason, that is still there. But we might choose a different diet the next time. We might choose, I don't know, a popular commercial diet where we have to count things like points. And then we send ourselves going back round in that cycle because we might not be able to eat out comfortably, or we might not be able to go to that wedding and enjoy the 3-course meal that's provided to us, which can then lead to excessive consumption and back round into that cycle. So I hope that you all kind of recognise what I'm talking about when I talk about the cycle of dieting. And actually seeing it written down, I think, can be quite useful to recognise whether you have been through that before. So next slide, please, Stevie. So self-compassion. So one of the key elements of intuitive eating is talking to yourself kindly. So having self-compassion is linked to higher levels of psychological well-being. And like I said at the beginning of this webinar, there's no magic key, and this isn't going to happen overnight, and it does take practice, especially if you are the type of person that kind of takes part in negative self-talk quite regularly. Media portrayal and kind of idealism of what an ideal body should look like can be damaging to our self-perception and our self-esteem. So for example, you're probably all wondering why there's a picture of Barbie and Ken there. So an example, a Barbie doll. So that was one of the earliest examples of role modeling to my age group. But the average female would need to grow 24 inches in height, increase their bust by 5 inches, their neck length by 3.2 inches, and lose 6 inches in waist circumference to achieve a Barbie doll physique, which I think you'll all agree is totally unachievable. We all, like I said earlier, we all have a different genetic blueprint, and we all have different body shapes. So trying not to pinhole ourselves into a certain physique or body shape because that's what the media tells us to do. Speak to yourself with kindness and think about the things that your body has allowed you to do. So your body may have helped you achieve or accomplish a certain goal. It may have helped you run around after your 3 children, for example, teaching them to ride a bike. Or it may have given you a home to live in for the past 50 years, or legs to explore new countries when you're on holiday. So just trying to, like I say, speak to yourself with kindness, and rather than judging yourself on what your body looks like on the outside, try to think about your body from the inside. So body neutrality is basically just taking care of your body. So it's about nourishing your body with food, not denying yourself food. Even, for example, having regular dental or medical checkups, that's a form of self-care and self-compassion. Gentle movement, using your muscle groups, wearing clothes that feel comfortable and don't dig in or feel tight. That is all a form of self-compassion and self-care. So unfortunately, this can't be supported by restricting food, not having self-compassion or negative self-talk can be supported by restricting our food intake and punishing yourself through exercise that you don't enjoy and judging yourself for your shape and weight. Next slide, please, Stevie. Okay, so neutralizing your inner food critic. So I'm going to use an example here because I think it's quite useful to use real life examples. So I have a 1-year-old son, and when I put food in front of him, he doesn't criticize that food. He doesn't work out how many calories are in it or how many grams of protein are in it. He simply chooses the food which looks more appealing to him. So when I serve his meals, I tend to kind of put a variety of foods in front of him. And sometimes it's the mango that he chooses because he wants something sweet, or sometimes it's the mashed potato or the baked beans that he chooses. He isn't analysing that food. He's just simply choosing what he wants to eat in that moment. We aren't born criticising the foods that we eat. You know, like I said, my 1-year-old son doesn't do that, but it's a learned behaviour that we learn as we grow through childhood and adulthood. Sometimes that behaviour can be learned from parents, grandparents, or sometimes it's the media or even diets that we've followed. So like I said, we tend to kind of form this concept of these are good foods and these are bad foods. And those lists, those kind of groups, where they've come from will be individual to you. Like I say, it can come from different diets that you've followed. Maybe we believe that we should only have 2 slices of bread a day because that's what such and such diet advocates. Or maybe we believe that, avocado isn't allowed because that falls into a certain food category on a different diet that we've followed. So over the years, a lot of these messages can all become intertwined. So a lot of clients will say to me, I just don't know what to eat anymore. I don't know what is good for me or bad for me or what I should be eating. I don't know what a correct portion size is. And all of those diets that person might have followed is kind of created this mishmash of advice. They've got myths from this diet, myths from that diet. And before they know it, they've got more foods on the bad list, the list that's saying, I can't have these, than the foods that they perceive in their mind to be allowed. So like I say, for example, bread has too many carbohydrates, bananas are too high calorie or high in sugar, avocados have too much fat. So unlike the baby or the child that uses their instinct and learns their own preferences, we've kind of come up with this set rule in our head to live by, which then affects how we eat and how we talk to ourselves around food when we eat those foods that we perceive as bad. So try not to scrutinise your food choices. Intuitive eating is more about observing what you're eating, not scrutinising it and judging what you're eating. Monitoring can be a really useful tool. I know, like I said, I've worked in weight management for quite a while, and when you ask somebody to do a food diary, they kind of roll their eyes at you, and it's something that they really don't enjoy doing. And I think that can come or stem from that food diary being handed in and then judged by a staff member, which can be really useful when people kind of don't know where they're going wrong with their eating habits. But it also can be a really useful tool for you. So, for example, on a food diary, if you're just doing it for yourself, you don't need to necessarily write down how many grams of this you're having or what portion size of this you're having. It can just help you identify links between certain foods and emotions. So I'm going to share, I'm hoping that Stevie will actually share it. I forgot to discuss it with her, but if not, we can send it out by email at the end. An example of a monitoring diary that is specifically designed for intuitive eating. And it is quite different to a food diary in the kind of typical sense that you might be used to. So I will go through that, I think, further towards the end. I've got an image of the example, but it's more about linking our thoughts around food. So what you ate, thoughts around your food, how is your body feeling, what else is going on? And like I said, it's not about judging that, it's just about observing with kind of curiosity and compassion around those decisions and those food choices. And like I say, how we were feeling when we ate that food. Next slide, please, Stevie. Okay, so diet culture and thinking styles. So I'm going to run through each of these different types of thinking styles. And these are quite common thinking styles that people experience when they have followed lots of diets. So first of all, we've got black and white thinking, or you may have heard the term kind of all or nothing thinking. So when you're rationalizing is basically extreme, that's what we class as black and white. So there isn't any grey area or middle ground. It's either I'm on the diet or I'm off the diet, I'm succeeding or I'm failing. For example, you maybe go out with a friend and you didn't plan on having a piece of cake with your coffee. But now you've eaten that piece of cake, you feel like the whole day is ruined as a consequence. And that is a classic example of that extreme type of thinking. So you might recognize phrases like, I'm back on it, I'm on the diet or I'm off the diet, or I've fallen off the wagon again. And these are classic examples of this thinking style. Next, we've got emotional reasoning. So emotional reasoning is basically when people have difficulty distinguishing between the fact and the feeling. So, for example, people think of themselves as a bad person because of an eating habit. So you might think of yourself as a bad person because you can't stop eating emotionally, which is simply not true. So I've had experiences with clients who've reported that, for example, that they're a bad parent because they can't manage their relationship with food, which isn't the case. That doesn't make them a bad parent. Your eating habits shouldn't have a bearing on your self-worth. They should be totally separate. Next, we've got comparisons. So like I suggested earlier when we went through self-compassion, comparison is basically around comparing yourself to others. So only seeing the positives in others and the negatives in yourself, and then comparing the two, which are, two completely different ends of the spectrum. So social media is a hive of self-promotion. So this is quite an unrelated example, but I remember when I first had my son, and he was my first child, and I remember seeing parents all over social media and Instagram. They're at a farm park with a full face of makeup, and I'm sat on the sofa having not had a shower, covered in sick. And we tend to only post those best parts of our lives, and that can make us perceive that we're not keeping up with others. We're comparing where that person is at the best point in their life, the best holiday they've been on, or the best day off that they've had, where their child is behaving, and you're comparing that to a day where you've had a really, really bad day, you've, like I say, covered in sick or whatever it might be. So try not to get kind of sucked into that social media hive of self-promotion, and just come back down to reality and remember that, people aren't going to post when they're sat on their sofa washing Coronation Street on an evening eating a dairy milk. They're going to post that lovely meal out that they've had with a loved one, for example. Next, we've got labeling and food hierarchy. So basically calling yourself critical names in response to action. So again, judging your self-worth on your actions around food. You may also label foods as good or bad. So it's not just about labeling yourself. It can be about food labeling as well, and having a food hierarchy. So good, bad, these foods are better than others. An example of this might be, I've been good today. So because you've perceived that you've had a good day of eating, that your whole self-worth is then judged on that. So I've been good today, not I've had a positive day of eating. So like I say, again, relating that, trying not to relate that self-worth to our food intake. And finally, should not, and must not. That's a mouthful. So how many of you kind of heard or said others say, oh, you shouldn't eat after 6 p.m. You shouldn't snack between meals. I mustn't eat a takeaway this week. And those are phrases that put you under a lot of pressure to do or to not do certain things. And then when those things are or aren't achieved, or they're not sustainable, then rules come from this, and feelings of anxiety comes from this. And it's inevitably going to lead to kind of low self-esteem around those choices. Next slide, please, Stevie. Okay, so mindful eating. So I think this is I know there's lots of people from lots of different backgrounds on this webinar, but on the Tier 2 programme, on the curriculum that I currently teach on, we discuss mindful eating as part of the weight management programme. And the key elements of mindful eating are basically around finding pleasure in food again, and experiencing food to its fullest, basically. But it's not overthinking. I know we do activities around holding, seeing, touching, smelling, placing, tasting a raisin or a small square of chocolate. But I'm not telling you to go away from this and do that with every meal or every food item that you eat, because that isn't achievable, and that's not what intuitive eating is. But occasionally that can be useful. And like I said, it's more about slowing down and paying attention to the food you're eating. And that can really help you enjoy the textures and flavours of food more. So for people who spend time dwelling on like negative thoughts around food, mindfulness, not just mindful eating, but mindfulness in general, can really help bring your attention back to the present moment and just remind you of what's happening in this present moment. So not thinking about what happened an hour ago or this morning or yesterday, thinking about what's happening now. Is that still a problem now? And not thinking about future worries. So what will I eat tomorrow? If that's not an issue right now, then try not to dwell on it. So by increasing your recognition of physical hunger and fullness cues, this can really help you distinguish between emotional hunger and true physical hunger. And I think it's the next slide we're going to look at hunger. So if you could just move on, please, Stevie. Yeah, so feeling hunger and knowing when and how much to eat. So I think telling someone to listen to their body without telling them how it's not really useful. So just over the next week, we're going to focus more on fluid rather than food, because I think that's a good place to start. Try just to recognise and observe how bodily sensations and kind of send signals to your brain. So try to focus on one thing at a time. So, for example, thirst. So next time you feel thirsty, think of the physical symptoms that you're experiencing. So is it that you've got mild signals that are starting to send that signal up to your brain? Have you got dry lips, or have you got a headache? Have you got a dry mouth? What are the kind of physical symptoms that you're feeling? And then try to move on to doing the same with hunger. I always think that thirst is a better one to start with because it's a little bit more obvious. And when you've chronically dieted, it can cause you to struggle with knowing kind of what hunger and fullness both feel like. And it can really interrupt some of those signals that your mind and body have with each other. We do use the hunger scale in weight management. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be using that and scrutinizing that, but it isn't a hard and fast rule. So sometimes you may get to a 2 on that hunger scale before you have access to food because your bus was running late or you had to pick a child up from an after-school club, for example. And that's okay. But I guess it's just thinking and recognizing about the knock-on effect that might have. So it might be that, yes, you got to a 2, you were very hungry when you had your evening meal. And yeah, I might need a snack in a couple of hours because I missed that snack in the afternoon that would have kept me at about a 4 when I had my evening meal. I hope that makes sense. I feel like I was babbling a little bit then, but I hope that kind of makes sense to you all. And like I say, the chat box, well, like Stevie said, the chat box is there. So please do ask questions if you need to. The hunger scale isn't a tool for you to analyse hunger, but it's just about observing. So observing how you felt when you ate and what knock-on effect that might have had. So did you get hungry just a couple of hours later, or did you eat more than kind of a 6 or a 7 on that hunger scale? And did that have a knock-on effect on your emotions later on that evening? So just moving on quickly to portion size. So I find that when working with clients, their portion, we call it portion distortion, but their perception of portion sizes can be quite skewed. one way or another. It can be skewed in the opposite direction, where they're kind of what they perceive as normal being too much, or it can be skewed in the opposite direction. So, it might be that a friend or a family member eats that much, so that must be a normal portion size, or that must be kind of what the packaging says is a normal portion size. So portion size is a really important part of gentle nutrition and weight management. But next time you're deciding what you want to eat and how much you want to eat, I just want you to kind of think about the questions that are on this slide. So how hungry are you? When did you last eat? How satisfying and filling is the food that you're going to eat? And when will you eat again? And then finally, how did you feel? How do you feel emotionally? So portion size and serving size are very different. So the serving size on food packaging is quantified by the manufacturer, not by a team of nutritionists or dietitians, and they have control over what they perceive as the correct portion size, or serving size, should I say, to put on that food packaging. So, for example, a suggested serving size on a packet of biscuits may be 1 biscuit, but in actual fact, an appropriate portion size for you as a snack between meals or with a cup of tea might be 2 biscuits, and that can still fit into a healthy, balanced diet. Also, remember that you don't have to be hungry to eat. And I think that's a common misconception when people are trying to lose weight. They think, I've got to use the hunger scale, and I've got to wait until I'm kind of between that 3 or 2 and 3, 3 and 4 to be hungry. I need to wait to eat. But actually, sometimes we just eat because we're craving something, or because we want to. If everyone's having a biscuit in a meeting at work and you want one, that's okay. Because if you don't honour those cravings, sometimes that can lead to actually more damaging behaviours. It can lead to overeating later on, and kind of obsessive thoughts around food and anxiety around food. Next slide, please, Stevie. So on the reverse, feeling fullness. So like I said on the last slide, chronic dieting can send our fullness and hunger scale or gauge quite out of whack. It becomes how we feel, broken or unreliable. And it can take a lot of time to relearn what these signals feel like. So often in my experience, clients will say, I wait until, or when we do the emotional eating session, we talk about feelings of hunger. A lot of the symptoms people come up with are feeling faint, or symptoms of fullness might be, I feel my tummy feels really full, or I feel bloated. And in actual fact, those aren't really the types of feelings that we should be feeling when we're feeling hunger and fullness. We might do on some occasions, and that's okay. But on a regular basis, getting a little bit more in touch with kind of a step previous to those signals is really, really useful. And like I say, it can take a lot of time to relearn what these signals feel like. So the feeling of fullness really varies from person to person. And the word overeating can be quite a troublesome word, because it implies that anything over the perfect level of fullness is a negative. But like I just said, there might be occasions where I'm really, really enjoying what I'm eating. I'm really enjoying this takeaway, or this piece of cake, or even, this Sunday lunch. And eating the rest of that meal because you want to and because you're really enjoying it is okay on occasions. It's what we do most of the time that matters really in weight management. It's what we do, I don't know, 50, no, that's the wrong, say 45 weeks of the year instead of 52 weeks of the year that matters. So terms such as comfortable fullness and uncomfortable fullness are less judgmental than, words like overeating. Comfortable fullness might be that we feel content, calm, satisfied. Our eating simply just kind of slows down a bit. So we might be eating a little bit faster at the start of a meal, and then it slowly kind of tapers off to a slower rate. And that's kind of a signal that we might be feeling satisfied. and feeling slightly bloated, but notice the word slightly there. So you shouldn't be feeling necessarily uncomfortably bloated. It's just kind of feeling like your stomach is distended a little bit. Like you can feel, if you had a belt on, it might feel a little bit tighter by the end of the meal. Satisfaction is a really important thing to discuss, I think, because again, with chronic dieting, we can become we forget what satisfaction feels like because we might be eating food that we simply don't enjoy. So there's an important kind of difference between feeling full and feeling satisfied. So, for example, a salad might make us feel full because of the volume. So there's lots of tomatoes, cucumber, high water, high fiber vegetables in there. So it might make our tummies feel full, but was it satisfying? Did it need a dressing? Did it need protein in there for some texture? Did it need some croutons for texture or some seeds on top? Did it taste good? Do you feel like you are satisfied at the end of that meal, or have you finished that meal still wanting more, still wanting something else? I hope that makes sense, that kind of the key differences. Trying to make things too healthy can cause you to feel unsatisfied. And then finally, on this slide, I'd just like to discuss the fullness trap. So there's an important period when eating when you are no longer hungry anymore, and the tank isn't full, but the tank isn't full. So many clients who I've worked with in the past choose to stop eating when they are no longer hungry. So using that hunger scale, they might stop eating at around a 5. But in actual fact, that can then lead to, wanting a snack just an hour later. And that can cause quite a lot of confusion for clients because they might feel, I've only just eaten. Why am I hungry? I'm confused because if I eat some more, then I'm going to feel guilty, for example. Okay, next slide, please, Stevie. Okay, so movement. So in weight management, I think we all recognise the benefits of movement, but with intuitive eating, it's about trying to shift that focus away from using movement as a way of burning calories, as a way of losing weight. Don't force yourself to do a certain type of exercise that you don't enjoy. Try to just focus on, I think that's why I've called this slide movement rather than exercise or physical activity. It's more about just moving your body, stretching your muscles. So dance, walk, stretch, even singing. Singing can make us feel out of breath if we're holding those notes to Beyonce for a long time. And feel the difference. Notice how that makes you feel. How does that make your body feel? How do you feel emotionally afterwards? Notice how it affects your mood, but also work within your limitations. So not all types of movement are right for everyone. If you have a medical condition, for example, fibromyalgia, it's really important to work within your limitations and notice how certain activities make your body feel. So one type of activity or movement just might not be suitable for you at that time. It might be something to progress to, but it might just be better off starting with something like stretching or singing and then working towards the dancing or a more formal type of stretching such as yoga. So just try to think about what you enjoy. So do you enjoy being on your own when you exercise, or do you enjoy being in a team? Do you enjoy being with friends? Do you prefer being outside in the fresh air, or do you enjoy being inside and being kind of warm and cozy? Do you like to be in water? Do you like to feel calm and centered, or do you like to feel like invigorated and hot and sweaty? So try to think about what your preference is. This isn't, again, it's not a one size fits all. We need to personalize it and tailor it to ourselves if it's going to have longevity. Next slide, please, Stevie. So gentle nutrition and weight management. So a lot of the stuff that I've discussed so far has been more about our emotions and our attitude towards food. But nutrition really is just basically the act or process of being nourished. So it's making sure that we're getting enough energy, enough of the right nutrients, and it's not about restricting our intake. But nourishment isn't just about physical food intake. Like I've suggested earlier, it's about emotional nourishment as well. So eating food should form part of self-care, understanding how different foods make us feel physically and emotionally, and how they make us, how they make us function. Do we function better having a certain type of food in our diet than not having that food in our diet, or vice versa? For example, rather than focusing on how many grams of carbohydrate are in certain food, unless obviously for medical reasons, focus on how energized that food makes you feel. Instead of thinking about what you need, or, I need to choose whole grains, think about how those whole grains make your digestive system feel. They might feel less sluggish after choosing whole grains instead of a white carbohydrate option, or a processed carbohydrate option. So choosing low calorie and low fat options can also sometimes be counterproductive, because we can sometimes end up eating more, or sometimes those foods just aren't satisfying. So when we take, for example, the fat out of a food product, the food automatically becomes less palatable. So fat is satisfying. It has a lot of so when we eat something with fat in it, the way that the fat kind of coats our mouths, the satisfaction that we get from that, the sensory attributes of fat, the creaminess that fat gives foods, all of that is missing if we choose kind of a fat-free option. If you enjoy the fat-free option and that still makes you feel satisfied, then of course choose that option. But if you choose the fat-free option, for example, yogurt, and that doesn't make you feel satisfied, and you end up snacking an hour later because of that, that means that kind of it's become counterproductive, because then we can actually end up consuming more calories, because rather than choosing the thing that we really enjoyed in the first place, or choosing the thing that we really wanted, we've not chosen that, but then ended up kind of searching for that satisfaction later on that day. So often when people have followed a plethora of diets over many years, like I said earlier, our nutrition beliefs get confused and they all get intertwined. And before we know it, we just kind of don't know what to eat anymore. But nothing is inherently bad for weight management. There's no food that is bad for weight management. It's only bad if it's eaten in excessive quantities. And sometimes we may choose to eat foods in excessive quantities. We may want to eat more of that food than at other times. And again, that's okay. It's what we do the majority of the time that is what matters. So try to forget the myths around, only having one slice of bread a day or 2 slices of bread a day, or that fruit is high in sugar, or, choose berries instead of bananas because they're lower calorie and lower sugar. Unless obviously for medical reasons, if you're counting carbohydrates, obviously follow that medical advice first. But try to put that to the back of your mind when practicing intuitive eating. So another kind of key point on this slide is that intuitive eating doesn't necessarily mean weight loss. And I know when you are following a weight loss program, that might be quite hard to hear. But your weight going up and down through cycle dieting is actually, it's a lot more harmful than just finding the weight, your natural stable body weight. So finding a weight that you feel comfortable at, and consuming a similar amount of energy on most days of the year, your body will find its natural weight. It'll find what works for itself, and trying not to fight against that can really help with kind of not going through that process of cycle dieting, which we discussed at the beginning. However, that said, your weight may go up, it may go down, it may stay the same, but it will be different for everyone. It can encourage natural weight loss just from kind of reducing the episodes of binge eating or excessive eating. But that isn't in everybody, because I am aware that not everybody struggles with those issues. So like I said, it's different for everybody. And I suppose trusting the process and trusting what this may lead to, and just trying it for, go all in just for a month, just for 2 months, and see what happens, see how you feel. even emotionally, see what benefits this might have. And I think you might be surprised by that. Next slide, please, Stevie. So finally, your toolkit. So like I said, I'm going to ask Stevie to send this monitoring diary out to everyone who's attended, or I can do that. And she might be able to share it in the chat, but I'm not always on Zoom, so I'm not sure. But monitoring is really useful for intuitive eating, and that's not completing a food diary. It's not judging how many grams of this and how many grams of that you've eaten. That might be something that you discuss with your healthy lifestyle advisor as part of your weight management journey, because you need that kind of support and you want that kind of support. But this is a different type of monitoring. This is monitoring without judgment. So not judging whether you've had a good day or a bad day, not feeling ashamed to write things down because you feel that somebody's going to have a look at it or check up on it. This is for your use only, for you to observe kind of what's going on with your intake and your emotions, and even where was I eating when I ate that certain food? Was I in the car? Was I distracted? Was I sat in front of the TV? Did I have children climbing all over me, for example? With that comes making a plan. So I always find it useful with clients to work on the times that they usually like to eat and try to stick to the same kind of plan each day in the beginning. So rather than trying to put too much pressure on yourselves to feel, I can only eat when I'm at this certain point of hunger, or I can only eat when it's, a meal time, try to think about the times when you are generally most hungry. So for me, it would be 11 o'clock in the morning. I know that I cannot make it to lunchtime without having something to eat. So that would be something that I plan into my day. And I think, what am I going to have? And just thinking ahead can make that food choice more considered, but also it can create less anxiety. Because sometimes when you get to the point where I'm hungry, but I just don't know what to choose, I don't know what snack I want, that feeling of anxiety around what to choose can have the opposite impact. It can it can make you choose something that's not satisfying, but also it can make you choose something that maybe you didn't plan on eating or want to really eat. Set the foundations as well. So commit to this. Like I say, just try it for a month, even try it for a week. A month might be too much to begin with. Just try it for a week and tell the people that you have regular contact with, tell your family and friends, and create a support network. It might be some of the people that are within your group. It might be your healthy lifestyle advisor that you wish to kind of get support on for this. But having a support network is really important. And like I say, putting that unconditional permission to choose the foods you enjoy into practice. So committing is really, really important, because if that dieting mentality is still there, if you're still focusing on having a preoccupation around good and bad foods, or putting weight at the forefront of this process rather than emotional health and emotional well-being, then it just won't have the desired effect. So a good step is to work on the foods that you have an unhealthy relationship with slowly. So maybe go away from this webinar this evening and just write a list of foods that you perceive as kind of your bad foods. If somebody was to ask you what foods are your good foods and what foods are your bad foods, just write a list of those and then start to reintroduce them one at a time in a way that you feel comfortable, and monitor how you feel when you introduce them. Was it as enjoyable as you thought, or you built up in your mind that it might be? Was it as scary as you thought it might be? Maybe you didn't end up enjoying it as much as you thought it might be, and it becomes one of those foods that isn't the forbidden fruit, the forbidden food. So like I said, I will make sure that you have got access to this monitoring diary after the webinar. So thank you for listening, and I welcome any questions or comments that are in the chat box. Thank you very much.